Welcome back, one and all, to PodStance, the PunkStance Podcast. It is me once again hosting you, but not just hosting this time. I've been off for a couple of weeks, as you know. The first week, I kind of just wanted to take a weekend off. I had a plan for an episode. I had a friend of mine who was going to do it over Zoom, but A, I thought it'd be much more beneficial for us to both do it just, in person, because we're both friends. And B, I sort of came to the conclusion that I was doing it to force an episode for that weekend. And I chatted to my mum about it, and she said, you don't really want to, you don't want to feel like you're forcing an episode out. You still do this for fun. It's still just a hobby. So if you're already feeling like you're forcing an episode out just to keep in line with this schedule that you've made up for yourself, then you're going to lose a lot of the enjoyment from it. And she made a very fair point. So I was like, fair enough. Maybe I'll just take a week off. And then I was going to do one last week, but I got COVID for like the fifth time. It's getting round again where I'm based. I'm not sure if it's a UK or global thing, but at the time of recording, I'm testing positive. It's a faint line, but it's there, and a lot of people at work have got it or have had it in the past week or so. So it's been pretty rampant, but I'm feeling good. I'm feeling fine. I just can't go to work, so I'm stuck at home. And what better thing to do than chat to loads of other people who are listening? Unfortunately, obviously, I can't get a guest in. I was going to do one over Zoom, but I think this sort of harkens back to 3-4 years ago when everything kicked off and everything was incredibly different. None of us knew what was going on at all. Like, I remember I was at university and just everything shut down. I remember in sort of February time of 2020, I was having friends over, we were going out for dinner, going out to the club and whatever. And then suddenly, middle of March, everything shut down. Funnily enough, it's the beginning of March now, so it's kind of all lining up. Nearly 4 years ago, we had the first lockdown, in the UK at least, and it was surreal, wasn't it? It was such a mad time to be around. It'll be the thing that goes down in history. We'll be telling our kids about it and our kids about it, just because it was such a unique time. I don't think there's ever been anything like that, and I don't think there ever will be. We'll have, future pandemics in however many tens or hundreds of years, but I think an experience like that, it was very divisive because obviously a lot of people died, but for other people who were we just experienced the world in a different way, and that's not something you're going to get. I don't think in my lifetime, I don't think in most people's lifetimes we're ever going to get anything like that again. So it was quite a unique time. But one thing that kept me going amidst all of that was music, as it should, specifically in 2020. So I've got a few albums that I just wanted to briefly talk about. This won't be as in-depth as some of the other ones, because obviously no one wants to listen to me ramble on for an hour or so. Although that's what the first two episodes were, so who knows? Maybe I've heard some favourites of some of those have been people's favourites for a long time. So maybe they just maybe this is good practice for when I go and speak by myself in a radio station for no adequate reason. But I've got a few from 2020 that I wanted to just briefly talk about. But I imagine that music played a vital role for a lot of people in that time. I mean, you're not exactly going out, experiencing the world as you normally do. You're kind of just sequestered inside, keeping yourself busy, basically finding anything you can to distract yourself. I've got a few anecdotes ready and raring to go for this exact discussion, but it was so different, and it was so interesting, especially my predicament at the time, which I'll go through sort of systematically as it happened. But I think there was the music that I'm going to talk about and the albums that I'm going to list, while some are slightly more popular than, the kind of normal thing that I would talk about on the page and on here, I think they stand the test of time, specifically in my memory, as being COVID albums. They were all released in 2020, but they all harken back to a day when I realised the world was different, and they always remind me of that. Some, for some positive reasons, some for negative reasons, but they're all very optimistic and positive albums. There are some, I guess some of them are quite weird because they were written pre-COVID. I don't know, it's just really strange that they were all written prior to COVID, but I just affiliate them with COVID albums. And they came out in 2020, so it's all affiliated. It's just they were all written and recorded and done prior to everything kicking off. One in particular, which I will start with. So, yeah, if this is something you're interested in, it's not going to be the usual kind of thing. Obviously, I can't let anyone back in the house. so I can't really record with many people in person, and most of the people that I want to do on Zoom are either my friends who I want to see in person or just busy. So I've got a few things lined up, obviously, but this is going to be something just to fill the gap, as it were. So I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, if you're into it, I'll see you on the other side. So one of the last memories I have pre-COVID, which I had saved, was when my housemates at university at the time, we found this, or a friend of mine, Louis, very good friend of mine, he sort of disappeared into the ether, as it were, doing work, as we all have. We all split our own ways and have continued doing our own stuff. But if you ever do listen to this, guys, you made COVID that much easier, so thank you all. But our house in Southampton, which is where I went to university, we were all based, we all met the year before. We were incredibly good friends very early on, and we all moved into this little flat. Well, it wasn't a flat, it was like a house. It had 5 bedrooms. But we all moved in together. We were one of the first groups who actually established a house fairly early on in first year. And just because we were such good friends, and we all got along in different and unique ways. And anyway, this group of 5, I've got a few videos that I found of us when Louis had initially, I think, gone skiing in Austria. And he brought back this bottle called Stroh, I believe it was. I believe it was Stroh. I don't speak any Austrian, and neither did he, seemingly. And he brought this bottle back. It was an 81% spirit, which I didn't know existed at the time. I didn't know that was possible. I knew that absinthe existed, but I didn't know that there were any others. So he brought this back. I didn't have any, but this was the 25th of February when this happened. So he brought that back, and there's a video of us setting it alight, and one of the other guys, Jenna, was talking about trying to burn most of the ethanol out of it, because you could literally just set it on fire. That was just how awful it was. And I distinctly remember Jenna was the one that had a shot of it, and he kind of skipped the drunk phase. He just sort of became hungover. It was incredible to watch, and that was the last sort of memory I have of being anywhere where we didn't even have a thought about it. There was news flying around, and everyone was like, "Oh no, people are getting sick, people are getting ill," but we didn't really know what was going on. And that was sort of the final night, I remember, where we were all just relaxed. We were all pretty chilled out. We were just pissing about in this house. I don't really know why. He just had it. He'd been on holiday and at Christmas and just had this bottle on him. And this was 3 days prior to the release of 4 Year Strong's latest album, Brain Pain, that came out on the 28th of Feb of 2020. Now, this was a pretty huge album for me, personally. I had never gotten into 4 Year Strong all that much, purely because I thought they were too heavy for me at the time. I remember listening to, I believe it was We All Float Down From Here, and a couple of other of their songs that I just thought were a bit too heavy, especially their earlier albums, their self-titled album. There was Rise or Die Trying, Enemy of the World, that I think a couple of years ago had its re-recorded version, which I got really into. I think In Some Way, Shape or Form had Stuck in the Middle, which is now one of my favourite songs of all time. But I'd heard about all these albums, never listened to them properly, but it wasn't for me. You know, and some people define these guys as like one of the definitive easycore bands of the era. They sort of started out in late 2007, I believe. I think it was the late 2000s. So easycore was really ramping itself up, and these guys, they turned out of nowhere and absolutely bombed it. They're still going now. You know, they've got, I think they did a holiday special or something at the end of 2023. I think it was November, if I'm correct. And they've literally, every album they've released has been sensational. But at the time, I didn't like it. I don't really know why. The kind of riffs that they bang out are unreal. If you haven't listened to them at all and you're a pop punk fan, whack them on. They are sensational. But obviously, Brain Pain, 12 tracks, came out on February the 28th. And it's the album that I would say I affiliate the most with the pandemic, purely because it came out literally just before everything kicked off. Because remember, that's the last day, well, I think it was a leap year at that point. It would have been a couple of days before March, which everyone remembers as being the longest month in the world. The longest month in the world. I've never felt a month go so long than March of 2020. Everyone had the same experience. Everyone had the same idea that when it started off in March and ended March of the same month, that took about 7 years. It was so long. Everything that happened in that month could have been compacted into a movie that was about 3 hours long. It was crazy. Like that was when all the madness started. My university had shut down like in the middle of February, so we didn't really know what was going on, but everything was shut. We had no work to do. We weren't going to lectures, we weren't going to campus. We were literally stuck at home. But the lockdown hadn't hit yet. So we had this weird like limbo period of about 3 weeks where we could basically do whatever, go to the pub, do whatever we wanted to do. There was so much like lack of abandonment. What's the phrase, isn't it? Joyful abandon? I can't remember what it says now. The point is that we didn't really know what was going on. I don't think anyone did. And we were just pissing about, finding things to do, like setting fire to drinks that were 80%. And then suddenly everything hit. I believe it was like the 17th of March or the 18th of March. I distinctly remember there being a picture of Louis on my phone that was the last sort of get-together we went to, which was the 16th of March, and then the 18th of March, I was inside. That's what I remember, but it's such a blurry time. I never really knew what was going on. I think we were all sort of in this weird boat where we were like, I don't know what... This is so unknown to me. It was such a strange experience to be quite literally locked into this house, and I didn't know what to do, but I had brain pain. And it had just come out, and all I could listen to was this album, because it was so goddamn good. And I mean, none of the songs really linked to COVID in a way, if at all. But I just found a lot of solace in listening to their music, and it got me into 4 Year Strong for the whole time. Like, everything that they've put out since then, and everything prior has just been top tier. And I cannot fault them at all. I think it was Dead End Friend was their most recent one. I can't remember if that was recently, or I think that was sort of the end of last year, November of last year as well. So they're busy, and I don't know what they're up to now. I imagine they've got another album in the works or whatever, but songs like Get Out of My Head and Crazy Pills, Learn to Love a Lie, and then the titular Brain Pain, Mouthful of Dirt, Be Good When I'm Gone, stunning acoustic track that. I always wanted to learn that, but I never got around to it. Usefully Useless, The Worst Part About Me. There's a lot of tracks that, like, it's a very powerful album about being lost, and there's your sort of quintessential relationship tracks like Learn to Love the Lie, about deceitfulness and that kind of thing. Talking Myself in Circles as well. Get Out of My Head is very similar as well. But you also had interesting songs like 17, which is just about being young, and Usefully Useless, which is about finding your own... It's about finding yourself in the world that you're in and finding your own passions and what you're good at. And it's such a... And Young at Heart as well is another one about being... Well, I mean, the title speaks for itself, doesn't it? But it was such an interesting album because none of those themes really stuck for me, because I just saw it as the album I listened to while we were stuck inside. There were so many experiences that I remember in that period that I can sort of move back to this album. Like when everything kicked off and people were starting to move back home, I and my housemate Eddie were the only two that didn't make it out of the house before lockdown hit. So his girlfriend moved in, who was also going to go back to London, I think. And so, I was third wheeling in my own house for a fair while. I'd say just over 3 months. And at the beginning of that, I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. Like, I don't know if I can do this. And in the end, like, the three of us became even better friends as a result of being forced to live together. We had our habits, we all did. But we actually found solace knowing that we were together. And it didn't really matter what we were doing as long as we had each other. Because my parents couldn't just come and get me. They quite literally couldn't just turn up. The lockdown was so strict that we couldn't leave for a fair bit of time. I remember when our little Tesco had to put in those traffic lights in order to let a certain number of people in. You had the hand sanitizers. You had those little like yellow dots that you had to stand on outside, like just to line up to go into the shop. And it was so weird. But I have so many good memories of that as well. I think if I was stuck on my own in that house in Southampton, I probably would have gone mad. And probably would not have been in a very safe space while I was there. If I had my own thoughts, Jesus Christ, what would I have done then? My brain is quite a weird place on even on a good day. So surviving through COVID just on my own would have been a bit of a challenge. But thankfully, I had two very incredible people there as well. We had so many stories. I distinctly remember there being the story of Eddie and his girlfriend. We used to like to cook quite a lot. We tried to make a schedule out of it, and I'm not a good chef. The best thing that I can do with food is eat it. I've stood by that phrase. I'm learning to do better now, considering that I'm working and have my own, renting my own place, and I kind of have to figure out what I'm doing with my life. So I have to learn eventually. But at the time, it was literally just, chicken dinosaurs or whatever they're called, potato waffles, bam, whack them in the oven, maybe the occasional hash brown, job done. And you know what? I'd still eat that. I'd still have that to this day. I think it's pretty banging. I don't see anything wrong with that at all. So if you're at university now listening to this and that's what you're eating, don't worry, we've all done it. I just did it for slightly longer, so I wouldn't panic. But anyway, there was this time when it was my turn to do the cooking, as it were, and I thought I'd go for an interesting pasta bake. Wasn't my best, well aware of that, but I thought I'd try and put a little spin on it. I can't exactly remember what it was, but I made it, I did it, put it on the table. I knocked on Eddie's door. Obviously, him and his girlfriend were in there at the time, and they stopped, opened the door, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I think they were just in bed watching something or whatever." I said, "Oh, dinner's ready." And they went, "Oh, perfect, we'll be right in." So they come in and start eating, and his girlfriend's just having an absolute ball. She's loving it, and I was like, "Oh, are you enjoying the meal?" And she was like, "Yeah, and like having kind of weird reactions. Like she was quite enjoying it for sure, but I couldn't tell if it was sarcastic or not. She was kind of just saying, I don't know, I was feeling quite insecure, so I thought she was just trying to be nice and say like, "Oh yeah, and it is nice." One detail that was happening was that Eddie was having a great time as well. He was laughing his arse off, and I was like, okay, well, maybe they've just been, maybe they're having a giggle about something that they were talking about in their room. Anyway, so they finished up, they cleaned because I'd cooked, and then they went back into their room. I went upstairs, thought nothing about it. I didn't think anything of it for about 2 months, maybe even longer. And we all, when everything was a bit more relaxed, we met up with some other people, and Lucy and Eddie told me the story of how when I actually came in, they were in the middle of something, as you can probably assume, but they couldn't finish. So Lucy and Eddie come to the table, and Eddie has very interestingly implanted one of those Bluetooth vibrators that you can use, and rather than those reactions being for my food, it was the reaction was for Eddie controlling that under the table without my knowledge. And it was disgusting to find out, and very sad, because I thought people genuinely liked my food. But it was hilarious, and I feel like I should have known that, considering the kind of reactions I was getting. I didn't think people would be orgasming and just going utterly mental for this little pasta bake I made in about 35 minutes. But that is what happened, and it was brilliant. And I distinctly remember one of these songs playing. I believe it was Talking Myself in Circles is in the background at the time. And that was just what was playing while I'd had the album on repeat. It had looped around at least 3 or 4 times, and then we started eating. And that was the song that came on while someone was being electronically fingered under the table while I was eating my food. So I can't believe I'm saying this on a podcast now, but that is what happened, and it was absolutely hilarious. But that's the kind of memory that's what I remember about COVID, rather than it being obviously a very scary time. A lot of people were getting very sick, and it was very scary at the time. But I think amidst all that, it was one of those experiences that you'll always look back on, because it will never happen again, hopefully, God forbid. But when it was happening, you'd have to find these little things just to entertain yourself. I remember when it first kicked off in Wuhan, there were videos of because the streets were so empty. That was another thing that was so weird. I remember it looked like fucking 28 days later in London when people just weren't moving. My brother, I think, well, he said it was recently, but he said it was very similar. Some of the times he went into London, he would see what was going on, and it was just utterly mental. But he said recently, I think it was for Christmas Day, when he came down, because he lives in London, and he cycled to the station. No, he cycled to my aunt's, and then my aunt drove down for Christmas Day. And he said cycling through London, he's never seen it so quiet. And it was very COVID-esque. And it was so strange. There were so many memories like that. Like we used to, when everyone left, our house was admittedly fairly druggy at the time, when we were at uni. And so when we left, and it was just myself and Eddie, there was there was a bit of weed left that had just been sort of left there in the house. And obviously the police weren't looking. They were too busy trying to keep the streets empty, as it were. So we were pretty much clean to just use them. But obviously we only had a certain amount of drugs to go around for the time that we were there. So we used to have what we call Weed Wednesday, I think it was like Takeaway Tuesday and Weed Wednesday, where we'd buy a takeout on the Tuesday, obviously, and then on the Wednesday we'd cook something just something in the freezer that we had and smoke the tiniest spliff that we'd ever seen, because it was all we had left. And so the three of us just shared that on a Wednesday outside, and it was great. You know, these little memories that you have that are so hard to come by now. I think, you know, it depends on how you look back on the event. There were so many things that were going on. I think another thing I did, I'm going to look up on my memories now and see what I actually did. One thing I do distinctly remember is I got challenged to complete Lego Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars, in the space of about, I can't remember how long it was, but it was probably about 2 weeks, I'd say. 2 or 3 weeks, certainly. I didn't get a lot of time. But on the 27th of June, which was like a couple of days before my mum came to pick me up when things were a bit more relaxed for the summer, I 100% completed Lego Star Wars 3, the video game. It took me 27 hours, 14 minutes, 44 seconds, just off 45 seconds to 100 complete it, with the comment, at long last, after just over a day of playing, it's complete. You know, that's the kind of thing you would get up to because you didn't have much else to do. Like, what else could you get up to? There was nothing else. You couldn't go outside. You couldn't just hang out with people on a regular basis. So that's all you could do. But I found so much fun and so much joy just finding these little things. I was still doing, I think I just started finishing up with my previous YouTube channel. Like, PunkStance wasn't even a thing at this point. PunkStance didn't exist until about September of that year. So when everything had calmed down a bit and things were a bit more relaxed. But in sort of March, April time, I had this little channel that I focused on, like, it was like video game reviews and, you know, the quintessential thing that you think is going to get big when in actuality, I mean, video essays are way bigger now, but that's mostly thanks to someone like H-Bomber Guy, who I'm dedicated to. Cite your sources, Bachelor. But I got into so many things. I was editing all my videos. I was getting so much done. I was playing a lot of GTA, I believe. But we also had a garden. So we spent so much time outside in this little tiny inn cave of our house. And it was so warm as well. The garden, we would, you know, all of us would be out there at least at one point. Just to make the most of it. And it was around then when all the shenanigans kicked off with the toilet paper and all the bread being taken and just all people were going just mental. Do you remember that? When people were just nicking and just stocking up on all this stuff because they thought the world was ending. And specifically toilet paper. That was the thing that kept coming up on the news. There was a video that I had of me going into our local Aldi, which was, you know, 5 minutes walk away, if that. And the bread shelf was just empty. There was nothing there. I think there was like a pack of Magic Stars there. Just a little pack. Wait, like someone had clearly like gone for the bread, but had some Magic Stars and was like so pissed off. They'd be like, "No, I don't need this anymore," and just threw them back. But it was, you know, it was small things like that, and it all comes back to the one thing that kept me going, which was music. The very reason that PunkStance exists is because I was listening to so much music at the time that I was like, I really want to talk about this. I really want to be able to tell people about the music that I like. Maybe it'll inspire them as well. And it did for a part of it. A lot of what I listened to was obviously pop punk and the easy core vibes that I had at the time. But I had quite a varied listening pattern. Like I'd just gotten into other random things in that year as well. I think my top song was actually something that I wasn't expecting at all. Oh no, never mind. It was Pack Your Shit by Why Everyone Left. Of course that was at the top. And then Death Valley Super Bloom by Thief Club was second. Sanctuary by Joji, and then Parade by Kevin Morby was up there as well. Like I Like Me Better by Love, or Love, however you pronounce it, is up there. There were so many random things in there, and I blame that on Will. I blame that on my friend Will, who I became exceptionally good friends with at the time, because he went to Portsmouth University, which was, you know, the neighbouring one that I don't like, and I'm not allowed to like Pompey sods, but he was a friend. He was someone I knew. And we used to make super secret sort of trips to see each other. He came down to Southampton the first time, and I distinctly remember him doing like flips in my garden because it was just something that we could do, and we had to test to make sure he was clean. He tested before he came and said, "Yeah, no, I'm I don't have it, we're not giving it to you. Because we didn't know how quickly you could we didn't know if we'd had it already. We didn't know if it was you could get it a second time or a third time. So we just had to be so careful. We didn't even know if we'd had it the first time, so we had to just hope and pray that we weren't going to get it from him. So he turned up, and I knew him. We'd done a few things before, and hopefully Will's one of the guys that'll be coming on the show very soon. I won't tell you his album, but I'm fairly sure I know what it is. But we knew each other basically, and we were decent friends because we were friends of friends, and we knew a lot of people that they also knew. But we spent so much time together because we were so close. We were just hanging out all this time, and it was brilliant. It was so much fun because I had someone else, No offense to the people in the house, but, they were a couple. They were together and they had each other, and inherently I felt like I was in the way. But then one of my good friends comes along, becomes an even better friend just from the fact that I couldn't see anyone else, It was almost like he became friend by default because he was the closest person. It was so strange, but we had so many good memories, and as a result of us hanging out a lot, we actually went on a trip to see his aunt, I think it was. It was a little tiny place called Chilthorne Domer, which was a village in Somerset. Literally, I don't know how it must have taken us hours to get there, but it was just, I'd never been there before. He just went, oh yeah, my aunt's doing something in July. I think it was a birthday thing or whatever. And he invited me along. And it was one of the best trips I've ever done. I met loads of his family. I just met a ton of friends of his as well that were around there. His aunt has a ridiculous amount of money. So she had a pool and a hot tub and all these fancy things that I'd never had the chance to really use before. And it was brilliant. But after that trip, things changed and things became so much better because things became a bit more relaxed. And I had this new friend who would come to mine most of the time. He was able to drive from Portsmouth down to Southampton. While we couldn't, do all the things we wanted to do and things weren't back to normal, we still found a way to have a laugh. Like, we'd go on walks. And one time, he bought an entire chicken as a snack. Now, I say this... Now, I don't mind this. I don't have a problem with someone buying a whole chicken. But as a snack, I think that's too far. We went over to Tesco, which is our local. It was probably about 2 minutes away. We did a walk there, quite hungover, popped in, and he said, what are you getting? I said, I might get a meal deal, maybe a couple of snacks as well. Nothing too crazy. And he went, oh, okay, yeah, same. Anyway, 30 seconds go past. We get to the self-checkout, and he's just carrying an entire pre-roasted chicken, a pre-cooked chicken. I said, why the fuck have you bought that? And he said, I really wanted chicken. I went, why didn't you get a little thing? And he went, I wanted a whole one. So this man bought and ate a chicken. And this is one of the things that makes me think that being an adult can be a lot of fun because you can just do that. It's like eating lasagna in the bath. No one can tell you can't do that. It's not illegal. It's not a problem. It's like yelling in public. You just step into a random pedestrian section, or just get out in the middle of the road when it's all stopped. I had to do that recently when I was going to Stansted Airport, and I was stuck for an hour, and I was genuinely considering just getting out of my car and going for a walk. Because there was nothing to do. I was stuck. I was just there. There was nothing I could do. It was very, very boring. But, my mum always said it was a crash. Something had happened and someone had been injured. But, I'd rather be in the queue than be that person. So, I'm getting off track because, Will was the guy who got me into all this random music from my top 2020 list. There were so many bits like Sanctuary by Joji, I Like Me Better, and there was quite a lot of just EDM that I had been listening to because of him. But there were two songs that distinctly defined my 2020. And that was Past Tense by Divided Minds and Japan by Throttle. Because these were the songs that we would say to each other was what inspired us to listen to the other parts of each other's music. So I listened to a lot of pop punk, and I felt like Divided Minds was the most accessible thing for that. And he really liked that song. Past Tense was the one that sort of blended the lines between an indie rock and pop punk and a cheeky bit of EDM in there. And then he had Japan by Throttle, which was this absolute classic Rocket League-esque EDM track. And it was absolutely sensational. And now, to this day, every time one of them gets played, the other one has to get played. It's generally Japan first and then PodStance afterwards, but they always come as a pair. And it's such a lovely little thing. That's the kind of musical connection that can be made by a number of people. Just those two songs always have to be played at the same time. And I blame that on him. I blame that on him because that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met Will and we hadn't had the relationship we'd made over COVID. It just wouldn't have happened. And even to this day, it exists. In the same way that we kind of fight on what the best Tristram song is. Will would say it's 1992. I would say it's Over the Edge, which are two songs that are right next to each other in the album. I think it's tracks 6 and 7 of his album WLUWD. I think it's With Love Until We Die. But yeah, that was brilliant. That was a stunning record. But all of that came from this one guy. And I distinctly remember that those two songs being what defined that era. And I think that was the top song. I think Past Tense was the top song of that year. Because obviously I'd started PunkStance in September. And I did like my final songs of the year. I think I only did 10. I can't remember what they are now. I'm going to see if I can find them. Back then I'd called it PunkStance's top 10 biggest surprises. Which, whatever. I think there were so many. So Past Tense was at the top. Pushing Daisies by Neck Deep from their All Distortions Are Intentional. That was another album that came out that year, which I completely forgot about. Not as impactful and not as good, but that song, Pushing Daisies, was an absolute slapper. Ended the record so well. 456 by Driveways was a very popular one between me and my friend Aidan. We listened to that one almost religiously. I think it was his top song for that year, purely because I'd shown it to him in like November and it became his top song in like a month. It's utter madness. Bad Intentions by Exit, obviously their record, Bored in America, came out in 2021, and that was easily one of my favourites of that year. And Bad Intentions was easily the best song on that record, with boy band in it as well. That was stunning work. Miss You in the Summer by Stick Up Kid, one of the most underrated bands to ever exist. I think they released a new song this year, but I can't remember what it was called. But they had their album Soul Drive, which was 2019. Miss You in the Summer came out literally in the middle. I believe it was in the middle when I was about sort of May, June time, and things were still pretty bad. And I remember getting really drunk one night and just hearing this song when it came on, and I instantly started crying. And I messaged the band very drunkly saying that I wanted to work with them. This was prior to anything of PunkStance existing. Just some random bloke typing saying like, "Oh, I love you so much, please let me work with you." It didn't work. They never sent anything back. And I don't blame them, frankly. They're an incredible band and they don't deserve my drunken mess being involved in that. Another one, A Dangerous Affair, Bringing Out the Beast in Me. Now that was one that came up fairly late in the exploration. They kind of just appeared on the scene randomly without me even realising. And it was a great track. It came out of their EP. They're a very, very underground band. I don't know if they're still doing stuff now, but that was a song that really stood out. Try Hard by Chief State from their album Tough Love. I think it was a 7-track EP. That was another standout song. I think I covered that as well. I mean, Chief State just have a way of not only being one of the better pop-punk bands out there, but they just have a way of writing introductory songs. Like they always have the track at the beginning is always the best. It just is. Same with one other that I'm going to come up to. I think there was one other that I had to mention. And Icarus by Bleacher Days. Yeah, another band that I haven't done a lot in a while, but did this really interesting like lo-fi rap song that I just really got into. I was in such a dark place at the time, and a lot of us were, and I remember putting that up and saying this was by far one of the strongest songs of the year, and really it was about drug abuse and alcoholism, and obviously I was drinking quite a lot of the time, and smoking a lot of weed at the time, and I felt like I was in a bit of a rut, and that song reminded me of it, that there are people out there that care about me and want to look after me, and it was stunning, made me really sad, but also very proud of. I look back and I'm very proud of the sort of corrections and the moves I've made in order to be the person that I am. But the two that I haven't mentioned are the other albums that I wanted to talk about outside of, not that I talked about brain pain all that much, but it was mentioned. Both of these records were called 20/20, which was just quite interesting, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure. It was just a weird coincidence, but I kind of not a weird coincidence because obviously they would try and go for an album like that. But the first one obviously was Knuckle 2020 that came out in September of 2020, so it was just after the main lockdown had happened. And this was probably one of, I would say a lot of people who are initial Knuckle fans don't like this album all that much. They said it wasn't particularly good, or it wasn't their best work, and they have Losing What We Love Now, which is a stunning record, but I would still put this as my favourite. I know a lot of people would say Copacetic and Shapeshifter are definitely better than that, and that's fine. It can be better. I just don't think I like them as much. Like the introductory song 2020, which was the actual introductory song and the song I used for that top 10, was yet again a record and a song that just blew me away. I think the kind of guitar work that you hear from Knuckle Puck, even now and back then, never ceases to amaze me. But other songs like Tune You Out, their debut single from that album, that was absolutely stunning. I think that was one that actually brought my brother from sort of kind of hating the band to outright proselytism. Just saying, like, he was like, this is genuinely an incredible song. I don't know why I didn't like this so much. Sidechain was probably my favourite for a while, just because of the guitar work on that song is just unreal. Not only has it got an incredible solo sort of 2/3 into it, but the recurring riff is just like so definitively pop punk, but that's what makes it so good. Knuckle Puck have always found such a great way of defining themselves in a very undefinable genre. They're one of the major success stories from the genre, where there's so much battling to get to the top. Obviously, Neck Deep we've mentioned, the story so far. So many of them are fighting for the top, and Knuckle Puck have always been so consistent with their work. They've never aimed for the top. They've always just been so good that they've gained the audience from that. I mean, this was their third album, I believe, and some of the songs on here is like following Sidechain. Earthquake, another single. RSVP, another single. Breathe, another single. What Took You So Long, I think, was another single as well. A lot of singles from this record. All of them were absolutely stunning. It's just so good. RSVP, I remember being short, but so powerful. What Took You So Long as well. Kind of convenient that both the Neck Deep album and the Knuckle Puck album that came out at a similar time had a song called What Took You So Long. Around the same position in the album as well. It was very weird. I just thought that was worth mentioning. It's just really strange. Breathe with Derek Sanders as well. I'd say Earthquake is the one I've come back to the most, just because it's a bit more relaxed. It's not as heavy. And the guitar work, again, it's so soft yet so memorable. I've always been a fan of that song. And I don't think it was Earthquake, but I believe it was Breathe that had its lyrics. I have it on the long sleeve, my Knuckle Puck long sleeve, which was, I want to breathe the air and not just to let it out, which was like a defining lyric from that record, and a defining one for my life at the time, because it was about not wasting a breath. It was about not wasting time and not doing things for the sake of it. You know, I want to breathe the air and not just to let it out. You're not doing this for the sake of something else. You're doing it because you want to. And it was such a powerful line, to the point where I got it on a long sleeve, so it must have been quite resonant with me at some point. The few others worth mentioning, I'd say the end of the album is slightly less memorable. The last two songs in particular, I don't really remember all that well, but you had Into the Blue and Green Eyes Polarized. Green Eyes Polarized, again, had a very memorable guitar riff that I look back on very fondly. And then it ended with True North and Miles Away, which I do recall, but it's just not the kind of it's not the ending that I wanted. I think it was a bit of a weak ending in my personal opinion, but like in terms of a collective album, it was just sensational. And that came out fairly late in that sector. I think a lot of the general COVID mishaps, well, obviously it was going to last for much longer than that, but I think the major developments that it could have gone through it had happened at that point, sort of mid-September. The big lockdown had happened first time, so the summer was a bit more relaxed, and this was going into the new university year, so this was us going into third year, when everything was online and just everything was different. And I think it was the album that defined the year for me. There was the other album that was also called 2020, which I'll get to in a minute, but it was probably the album that I had that defined that year the most in terms of the major events. I wouldn't say personally, that's one other album that I'll get to at the end, but I'd say in terms of its sort of political and the general result of what happened in that year, so the pandemic, politically, everything that happened, I feel like that album resonated with me the most in that regard, and sort of encompassed everything that had happened in that year into one record. By accident or intentionally, I don't know. I actually believe that 2020 was written prior to the pandemic, so it came out fairly late in the year, but I think Tune You Out came out a year before that release, so it would have been 2019 when that actually came out. So it's hard to judge if all of these are accidentally in conjunction with the year or just happened, just was pre-planned and everyone in Knuckle knew that the pandemic was going to happen. But it was so mad, and it's such a great album. I absolutely adore it, and I think it gets a lot of shtick in terms of Knuckle records and a lot of pop punk records. A lot of people don't like it. If that's just because of the ending, then I think you're losing possibly 7 or 8 of the best songs the band have ever written. But that's the thing, like, these albums come at different times. I remember Shapeshifter was what inspired me to buy an electric guitar in 2017, which I still have. It's literally right next to me. I've still got it 7 years on. So yeah, it's a great bit of kit, that, but I do need to upgrade it. And then Copacetic as well. I mean, Copacetic people put down as one of the greatest modern pop punk albums of all time, and I completely agree with them. It's definitive. It's what put them on the map. Songs in there just have aged sensationally in the genre and never get old. And Untitled in that was the first song I used in that reel that I put up ages ago, because I thought that's the kind of content people wanted. Because it's a great song to do a puzzler to. It just is. It's brilliant. But that entire album is sensational. And obviously Losing What We Love that we have recently, I think that was the end of last year, October of last year, is yet again not as memorable as the others, I would say. But it's the one that has gotten my younger brother into Knuckle. So I will happily take that. I think it was Groundhog Day. And Out of Touch was probably my favourite from that album. That's a sensational record. But the other one under the 2020 bracket, shall we say, was by a very, very underground band, who I hope actually listened to this. You're going to be about 40 minutes in, but you are in it, I promise. Which was a band called Lightweights. Now, at the time of recording, they have 307 monthly listeners, which is just sad. So sad. They haven't done anything since 2022. June 17th, 2022, they did a song called Give Up. Ironically. And 2020, it was a 6-track record that came out, and I'd never heard of the band prior to this, but obviously I was looking, with things like, with 2020 being a year to remember for good and bad, I figured there'd be at least 1 or 2 records that would reference it, to do with the phrase of hindsight is 2020, or whatever, those random idioms that come up, or colloquial metaphors that just sort of relate to the year. And this was one of them, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. I think I'd added Call to Mind, which was their single. I'd listened to that prior to the release of the record, and I was like, oh, I quite like this. It's got some heavy pop punk vibes. I'll certainly give it a go. And it was quite possibly one of my favourite records of that year. And I don't think anyone, certainly no one listening to this, will have heard it. If you're a heavy pop punk fan, much like 4 Year Strong, you would be doing yourself a disservice not listening to this. It's absolutely sensational. Like, all of the I think Old Style I've come back to loads of times just because of how complex but how impressive the guitar work is for a band that I'd never fucking heard of. It was brilliant. It's so fast. It's heavy punk. Like, there's some pop punk in there, but it's some heavy punk, heavy easy core, and it was just brilliant. I absolutely love it. There's so many songs in here that I can recommend. I mean, Stability as well with Rex Bush, whoever that is another great single that they had. Call to Mind was the 3rd track, which was their debut single for the record and their primary single, which was sort of their primary pop punk intro, I would say. Like, if people were going to know this band, they would know it for this song. I think this is easily their most listened to song, I'd like to point out. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, not by much, though. Old Style is at about 64,000, but Call to Mind is at 84,000. 84, I'd put the emphasis on that wrong. Point is, it's 20,000 listens more than their next highest. Obviously, as a single, that was meant that would happen, but it just goes to show how good Old Style is not a single and, close to being as popular. And Repeat the Cycle was fourth, which I don't remember as much about, but I remember being very chunky in its guitar work and very hefty in its beats. But the one after that, the penultimate song, which then links into the final song as well, which was A Better Side in brackets of Me. This would probably be one of, if not my favourite song to play on guitar. It's not complicated, but it's incredibly effective. It's so much fun to play. It's got everything you would want. It's got complex lead work. It's got impressive chugging for the rhythm. It's got some heavy breakdowns at the end. And then when you think it's about to be done, it gives you that one extra bit of scream. And then it gives you that final chug at the end. I just don't forget. It gives me goosebumps every single time. It's a final chug that closes it off. And that's all I can say without ruining it. Like, I think it's just under 4 minutes long, so it's, it's a decent length. But every single element of it works. It's one of those pop punk songs that never ceases to get boring. It's one of those that I can always come back to, and it will still impress me. Just every single time. And that'll flow into Dissociate, which is another great track. I don't know if this was a single. I'm fairly sure that it wasn't, but I'm going to double check anyway, because I didn't plan for this at all. It was a single, yeah. Call to Mind, Stability, and Dissociate were all singles, and then it released in May the 1st, so it was just before my birthday. Obviously, this was bang in the middle between the summer release of, the lockdown getting sort of a bit looser and the kickoff of the lockdowns. It's bang in the middle. And I remember this coming on when I was listening to other little bits, and it blew me away. And then I looked at the number of listens that this group had, and I was just appalled, because this is the reason that bands go under the radar, because nobody knows about them. And some of the best music you'll ever hear is just in this ether that you can't find. It's so hard. Like, I'm so lucky that I have a lot of contacts and a lot of playlists that help me find these. Like, I'm writing about a song today that should be going up in a couple of days, and the band approached me for it, and it's gratifying for sure, but it's so sad because you feel like these bands don't have a lot of choice but to contact me, little old me, who's not a professional in any way, who just likes music. I mean, fuck, I'm trying to get I changed to doing reels because I thought it would be better for audiences. I think when I was looking through my content, I made the presumption that a lot of people don't actually read the posts that I put up. I think they just sort of look at the cover, they look at the album cover, and if they like the look of it, they might go, "Oh, that's interesting, I'll read the first sentence." But because social media is such a instantly gratifying platform, people aren't gonna fucking read however many lines I've put. I write little War and Pieces about music. I'll write, if it's probably the equivalent to a few paragraphs, because I want to write and I want to show my appreciation for the music. But other people don't care about that shit. They don't care. They want instant gratification from a reel. They want to see 30 seconds of the worst content you've ever seen. I mean, I can't deny I've been watching through loads of stuff. It's mostly band stuff to find. Like, the algorithm now for my PunkStance page has gotten to the point now where I listen to so many new bands that it will just recommend me underground artists. Like, it will just give me a list as I'm scrolling through. It will just give me loads of bands who have put out little ads for their music. And I think that's great. I absolutely love that because it makes my job so much easier. But it's really hard to imagine. Well, considering I've spoken to a few bands now, I think it was Stankfinger especially, talking about the graft you have to put in just to even be noticed, let alone be successful. It must be so hard to be in an industry like that. I mean, I wanted to be a filmmaker prior to this. I still do, to an extent. And to get into that industry is so hard. So hard. I had people I knew. I had contacts. Like, they say it's who you know. And I had people that I knew, and I still couldn't get in. Because at the time, I was applying mid-COVID. So all this work was... There wasn't any. There was nothing going on. And it sort of killed my interest at going back, because Now, everyone's watching Netflix every day and Disney Plus and whatever. They're releasing new shit every week. God knows how they're getting all that out. Oh, no, wait. I do know how they're getting it all out. They have so many fucking employees just cranking it out. And anyone who has an interest in this art form or any interest in the industry, they won't get in. Everyone knows everyone in that industry now. So unless you're incredibly lucky, then there's no chance. I guess it's the same for podcasts as well. I think consistency is key. Being consistent and constantly releasing stuff is the most important thing you can do to get noticed. But on Instagram, putting your reels up, like mine would never do. The retention of my audience for my page has gone down, ironically, for putting up content which I thought would get it up. But maybe that's just part of the process. Maybe you've got to take a little bit of a risk for it to pay off in the end. But I don't know. It's tough. It's really tough out there. And it was tough out there for a while. It probably will be, going forward from this. But I think the COVID time was probably the most difficult. I've heard a lot of stories of people recording mid-COVID, not being able to, obviously do it professionally, having to do it in their houses. And I think that's, as much as it gave us so many new bands and so many new albums, which I'm forever grateful for, like, that must have been hard. That must have been so tough to try and push yourself in an industry that wants nothing to do with you. Musicians have to, especially underground musicians, have to traverse an industry that is constantly pushing back. They're in a world that doesn't recognize them, doesn't recognize their talent, doesn't recognize what they want to do. And it's why I would commend, especially in a genre like pop punk that only has like a very specific audience. I know it's getting out in the mainstream now, but that's a different kind of sound to what I like and what I'm used to. But people are still pushing it, and it works because a lot of albums and a lot of bands are still making quite good headway. I know for a fact that Neck Deep are doing incredibly well, and they're the most definitive pop punk band out there, in my personal opinion. I've heard a lot of other bands say otherwise, but that's the beauty of the genre. It's very varied. But it was a tough time, COVID. It really was. It was difficult. But amidst all of the records I've talked about today and sort of waffled on about, I think there was one that really struck out, and one that I will forever have as the one that I was waiting for, the one that kept me going through all of the trials and tribulations of that time. And some of you might already know what it is. I doubt it, but it was quite possibly, it's the title of the album is also the title of the track, and vice versa. And it's quite possibly one of my favourite songs of all time, and one of my favourite bands of all time, which is Big Vibe by Seaway. So the album came out on October 16th, so it was a bit later after the Knuckle album, but I remember saying in one of my first posts that there were like two main albums that I was excited for, which was the Knuckle one and this one. They premiered the single Big Vibe a few months prior. I can't remember exactly when it came out, but I remember being incredibly excited when it came out. And it was basically all I listened to for probably about 2 weeks. But it was just the perfect track to play out the summer with. The album came out sort of later in the year, but I had it for the summer. And it was so infectious. It was just, I was constantly singing along to it to the point where it would annoy people. I'd always be like, can you put Big Vibe on? Can you put Big Vibe on, please? Can you put Big Vibe on? It's become a bit of a meme now with a couple of friends of mine that every time it comes on, we just have to sing to it because it's so catchy. It's so fucking catchy. It's brilliant. Like, I cannot just phrase how good this song is. In terms of like songwriting and complexity, it's not very good. It's not meant to be that. I think it was something Carlo said where it's like a long song and a complex song doesn't make a good song. Sometimes in its simplicity, songs are at their best. It has just like killer electric guitars, dance-worthy drums, and very sort of 80s power pop. It takes a lot of influence. I think the entire album took a lot of influence from the mid to late 80s, but it set the scene for the whole album. It was just buzzing. It was just so unbelievably catchy. And it ended up, it became probably my favourite record of that year. There were so many records of that year that were probably my favourite, and I keep saying it. But it just was. every single one was great, but Big Vibe really stood out. I know it started with Brain in a Jar, which has, again, been one of my all-time favourites. Mrs. David was another single that absolutely blew me away, just because of its catchiness and the kind of 80s aesthetic it was trying to create. Still Blue, another single, was a bit more punk hefty and really pushed a sort of a new sound that they hadn't really explored all that much before, but I loved it. Wild Things was another single that was a bit more, I can't really describe it. It was a bit more sort of electronic, a bit more relaxed, a bit more chilled out, but heavy on the electronics, and it was sensational. And it was something they'd never really explored before, and I loved it. It was so great. Pathetic again, definitive pop punk. You're not going to get much better than that. Sweet Sugar and Peach were looking a bit more on the way. I think If You Let Me as well. They were mostly sort of, admittedly, filler tracks. They were just there, but what they had was the kind of infectious pop punk that you can't get out of your head. Like, every single song was like that, but those three in a row, while not particularly definitive individually, as a group, was something special. The penultimate song, Wicked, was another one that really stood out to me. A bit like Pathetic, it was just a definitive pop punk track, kind of blew the doors off everything I thought the penultimate track could be. And leads into Sick Puppy, which, again, a bit like the Knuckle 2020 record, while the ending isn't as strong as I think it could have been, it was the songs before it and just everything about the album as a collective that really made it stand out. I think this general conversation that I've had with myself, it hasn't really been to show you that these are the best albums in the world, because they're not. Everyone had their own unique records that kept them going through the pandemic. But being off this week with COVID and sort of being stuck inside, having to test again. That was something I haven't done in ages. I had to test again, stick the fucking swab up my nose. Ugh, it's disgusting. And just being careful, you know, going to the shop and like buying these tests and having to make sure that I'm not around people and sending tests to work and them saying, no, you can't come in, you know, you've still got it. It was like being sent back 4 years ago. And it gave me that, I wouldn't call it nostalgia, it wasn't that long ago, but what it did is it brought back those memories of those records and those albums that I remember so much about at the time and now were initially lost to obscurity and lost to the saturation of the genre. But I think what it did is, while, you know, being ill sucks, it brought back those little memories of the best parts of the pandemic, or what I would call the best parts, because the actual experience of being in the pandemic was dog shit. I wouldn't want to go through that again, and I don't think anyone who lost friends, family members, colleagues, you know, it was a tough time. It was really hard, and it still is hard today. You know, some people aren't vaccinated, some people are getting it for the 5th time. Hello. There's a lot of anti-vaccine rhetoric. Even recently I rewatched H-Bomber Guy's vaccine video because I've heard, you know, there are still people out there that aren't vaccinated for it, and it can still get you. You know, I had a couple of days where I had a fever, I was still unwell. You know, just because you're vaccinated and have a booster, it doesn't mean that you're immune. But I would 100% get another booster because I'm alive because of it, or I'd like to think that I'm alive because of it. Not to get too political, but get a vaccine. It's I don't, you know, I know there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of anti-vaccine rhetoric, but get one. Just do it. It's not hard. I know it's kind of out, like I'm sort of doing this PSA 4 years too late, but it's never too late, I guess. But yeah, this was just a little something different, you know. I don't think I've taken a couple of weeks off. Well, the first week I wanted off anyway, and then the second one I was just ill. So with this very thing, so I think this has been a long time coming, so thank you for your patience. Obviously, it's been a bit of a weird time trying to get all of this sorted and get back into being healthy. But I'm feeling a lot better now. There's a lot planned for the future, and I just want to say thank you. Now, obviously, there's been a few breaks, and I'm trying to figure out where this page is going, but I think talking about old albums and the kind of music that we used to listen to back in the day of 2020 and 2021, That was their album. Oh, I forgot the 2021 album, but it doesn't really matter. I can go through it quickly. Basically, I was a huge Waves fan, and because I was playing a lot of GTA 5, I listened to Nine is God again, and I realised that they had an album coming out in 2021 called Hideaway. It wasn't as COVID-centric, but a few of the songs I was listening to when the second lockdown and the third lockdown hit, and it was still pretty rife in 2021, but I remember listening to, like, Sinking Feeling and Help Is On The Way and stuff like that, and Caviar it closed on, and Through Hell that opened it up, and songs like that were just that. I think that wasn't really a sort of a specific song that I remember about it. It was just as a collective, because I was such a huge Waves fan, and I'm still such a huge Waves fan, but because I was playing a lot of GTA in COVID, I was listening to that soundtrack again, and obviously Waves was in there, and then they had a new album coming out, and I would still say Afraid of Heights, V, King of the Beach, and You're Welcome as well. That was the other album. I was trying to remember the name of it. They're all better, I would say. Well, maybe no. Hideaway's better than You're Welcome. You're Welcome wasn't great, but had some good songs. But yeah, I think that was just another thing. The whole thing is that COVID would reignite my love for previous bands like Knuckle, like Seaway, like Waves, and found me some new ones like Lightweights and a smattering of others. And 4 Years Strong, I guess, was big at the time, but I just wasn't a fan of them. I didn't get them. But I think in the grand scheme, COVID was pretty shit, but I got a few cool bands out of it and an illness 5 times. But mostly it's about the music, because this is what this page is all about. So thank you very much, guys, for listening. Obviously, this is very different and me yammering on for an hour long, but things will be back to normal soon. Don't you worry. This will probably come out slightly later than my normal scheduling, purely because I've been ill for the whole week. So I'm just hoping that I can get things out on time. But obviously, yeah, thank you very much for listening in. Things will be back to normal in due course. And I would suggest listening to all of these bands and all of these albums. Some of them are very well known in the genre, some of them not so much. And I think it's just well worth listening to. But yeah, hope you guys are doing well. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time.